In the dying months of World War II, the Japanese Empire faced a grim inevitability: defeat. By mid-1944, American bombers had reduced much of Tokyo to ashes, and Imperial forces were losing ground across the Pacific. Yet amid the collapse, a secret operation was underway, one that would blur the lines between military strategy and legend. It was called Operation Golden Lily, a codename whispered only among Japan's highest-ranking officers and the inner circle of Emperor Hirohito. Its purpose? To safeguard the vast wealth looted from across Asia before it could fall into Allied hands. Under General Tomoyuki Yamashita, known as the Tiger of Malaya, this operation took on a new level of urgency. Yamashita had already built a fearsome reputation after his lightning conquest of British Singapore in 1942, but now his orders were of a different kind. He was to oversee the transportation and concealment of gold bullion, precious stones, religious icons, and cultural artifacts seized from the occupied territories of China, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, and the Philippines. The wealth was staggering, estimated by post-war investigators to be worth billions of dollars in today's currency. By 1944, the Philippines became the empire's last major stronghold in the Pacific. Its dense jungles, vast cave systems, and mountain ranges made it a natural hiding ground. Japanese engineers, assisted by forced laborers and Allied prisoners of war, dug complex tunnel systems deep beneath Luzon Island. According to surviving testimonies, entire mountainsides were hollowed out to create chambers reinforced with steel and concrete. In some accounts, intricate booby traps and sealed passageways were designed to ensure that anyone attempting to uncover the treasure without precise knowledge would never leave alive. In Manila, Japanese naval convoys arrived under heavy escort, carrying crates marked only with imperial seals. Local witnesses recalled night convoys of trucks heading north, their headlights blacked out, guarded by soldiers of the 14th Area Army. The materials were said to be escorted to hidden depots near the cities of Baguio, San Fernando, and even within the dense Cordillera mountain region. Some vaults were allegedly flooded or detonated to seal them forever once the contents were in, placed American intelligence. Units stationed in the Pacific began picking up scattered reports of strange Japanese engineering projects in Luzon's interior. One OSS field report from late 1944 noted significant enemy activity in mountainous regions inconsistent with defensive preparation, possible asset protection operations. But with the war's tide rapidly shifting, the Allies were more focused on invasion and liberation than treasure. Any clues were buried in the chaos of combat. The human cost of the operation was immense. Filipino forced laborers, known as sakadas, were reportedly executed after completing their work to preserve the secrecy of the tunnels. Prisoners of war, Americans, Australians, and British, suffered a similar fate. In one survivor account, a US Navy Seabee captured near Lingayen Gulf recounted hearing the distant sounds of digging, followed by muffled explosions at night. They were sealing something, he said, and they didn't want us alive to talk about it. As the US 6th Army advanced through Luzon in early 1945, the Japanese defensive lines crumbled. Yamashita retreated north into the mountains of Kiangan, bringing with him a dwindling but loyal force. The operation had succeeded in concealing its secrets, if only for a time. But rumors began circulating among Allied troops and intelligence officers that something more than military supplies had been hidden away. Gold coins, ingots, and religious relics appeared on the black market, traded by local guerrillas who claimed to have found imperial treasure abandoned by retreating forces. When General Yamashita finally surrendered to Major General William Gill of the US 32nd Infantry Division on September 2, 1945, he was brought to face justice in Manila. His troops had committed atrocities during the battle for the city, and the Allies were determined to make an example of him. Yet even as the War Crimes Tribunal assembled its evidence, US intelligence officers pressed him for information on the rumored treasure operation. Yamashita remained defiant, responding to one officer, "I fought for Japan. I know of no gold." In the weeks before his execution, Allied investigators combed through captured documents and interrogation transcripts, seeking any reference to Golden Lily or hidden caches. They found fragments, cryptic maps, shipping manifests, and coded messages, but never a clear answer. When Yamashita was hanged in February 1946, the secret of Japan's buried wartime wealth seemed to die with him. But beneath the ashes of Manila, and the silence of the mountains, something remained. Vaults sealed in stone, maps locked in memory, and whispers of a treasure that had survived the empire itself. What began as a desperate wartime operation was now a legend, one that would haunt historians, soldiers, and treasure hunters for decades to come. And yet, as post-war Japan rebuilt under American supervision, some within US intelligence began to wonder, had the gold really been lost, or had someone already begun to find it? The war was over. Japan had surrendered. But for General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the so-called Tiger of Malaya, the battle for his legacy was only beginning. Captured in the rugged mountains of Kyangan, Ifugao, on September 2, 1945, he was brought to Manila under heavy US guard. The once proud general, who had commanded over 250,000 men across Southeast Asia, now stood accused of war crimes committed by his troops during the brutal Battle of Manila. But behind the public charges and courtroom drama, another story was unfolding, one that had little to do with atrocities and everything to do with gold. By October 1945, Yamashita was held at the US Army's Bilibid prison. American intelligence officers, some from the OSS, others newly assigned to the G2 intelligence branch of General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters, began discreet interrogations. They asked not about strategy or combat, but about Operation Golden Lily. Reports from the field suggested that vast quantities of looted treasure had been moved across the Philippines under Yamashita's supervision in the final months of the war. The general denied everything. "I fought for Japan, not for gold," he told his interrogators in broken English. MacArthur himself was aware of the rumors. As the supreme commander of the Allied powers in the Pacific, he oversaw both the occupation of Japan and the post-war trials. Privately, however, his intelligence officers, particularly those in the economic and psychological warfare sections, were investigating whether looted wealth could be used to finance post-war reconstruction or covert operations against communism. To the public, the trials were about justice. Behind closed doors, they were also about information. The Manila War Crimes Tribunal began on October 8, 1945. It was the first major Allied trial of a Japanese general, and the atmosphere was charged with vengeance and symbolism. Witnesses testified about massacres, the destruction of Manila, and the suffering of civilians. Yet some Allied officers noted the peculiar line of questioning that surfaced between sessions. Inquiries into Yamashita's logistics officers, transportation records, and engineering units. The pattern suggested a dual agenda: prosecution on one hand, and intelligence gathering on the other, declassified. Field memos from 1946 reveal that elements of the US Counterintelligence Corps, CIC, conducted parallel investigations into hidden Japanese caches in the Philippines. A report dated January 3, 1946, mentions sealed tunnels north of Manila, possibly containing contraband assets of imperial origin. Another notes cooperation from Filipino informants familiar with Japanese wartime construction in Cordillera region. Each clue pointed back to Yamashita's final months of command, but the man himself remained. Uncooperative Colonel Edward Lansdale, a rising figure in psychological operations, later recalled in an internal memorandum that Yamashita was a soldier to the end, proud, disciplined, and silent. He knew something, perhaps everything, but he chose death over disclosure. Lansdale's note would gain new significance years later when similar operations were conducted under his direction during the Cold War. In the courtroom, the prosecution's case rested not on what Yamashita did, but on what he failed to control. His troops, particularly elements of the 14th Area Army and the Shobu Group, had committed atrocities during the defense of Manila, but historians would later question whether he had actual command over those forces, many of which acted independently under naval officers or rogue commanders. The Yamashita Standard, holding commanders responsible for crimes of subordinates, became a precedent in international law. Yet, to some observers, it was also a convenient way to silence a man who knew too much. As the trial drew to a close, American officers again pressed Yamashita about the vaults. One declassified interrogation record, partially redacted, references a series of underground chambers west of Baguio, sealed prior to surrender. The document notes the prisoner's refusal to comment. Within weeks, the record disappears from the official case file, reappearing decades later in an unmarked archive. On February 23, 1946, at Los Baños prison camp, General Yamashita was led to the gallows. A small group of American and Filipino officials witnessed the execution. Moments before his death, he spoke quietly through an interpreter. "I have done nothing wrong. I served my country faithfully. May God forgive all. No mention of treasure. No confession, just silence." But not all the Americans present that day believed the story was over. In the weeks following his execution, US Army engineers were dispatched to several known Japanese bunker sites north of Manila. Officially, their orders were to clear unexploded ordnance. Unofficially, their mission was to survey sealed tunnels for intelligence materials. Reports from these missions were never made public. Among the engineers was Captain Edward McMullen, 511th Parachute Infantry Regiment, who later wrote in his diary, "We found a tunnel, deep, booby-trapped, and freshly sealed. Inside, fragments of Japanese currency, melted gold leaf, and the smell of death. Someone was here before us." McMullen's journal disappeared after his sudden reassignment to Tokyo. The war had ended, but the treasure hunt had just begun. As American forces departed the Philippines, they left behind more questions than answers. Who ordered the post-war excavations? Did US intelligence recover part of the hidden loot? And if so, what became of it? Yamashita's silence had left a vacuum, one that would soon be filled by secret agents, fortune seekers, and shadow financiers. The legend of the lost gold had survived his execution, and now, in the ruins of a liberated nation, the race to uncover it was about to begin. The war was officially over, but in the jungles of the Philippines, another kind of mission was just beginning. In the spring of 1946, as the US military wrapped up its occupation operations, reports began to circulate among engineers and local guerrillas about strange discoveries, tunnels, sealed chambers, and cryptic markings carved into stone. Most of these rumors were dismissed as wartime debris. But for a small circle within US intelligence, they pointed to something far more significant: evidence that Japan's wartime treasure, the so-called Yamashita gold, might be real. The Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, the wartime predecessor of the CIA, had already received fragmentary intelligence about hidden Japanese caches during the final months of the Pacific Campaign. Field agents stationed in Manila, under the direction of Colonel Charles Willoughby, MacArthur's chief of intelligence, filed reports about engineering works inconsistent with defensive construction. When the OSS was disbanded and reorganized into the Central Intelligence Group in 1946, several of these agents carried their files with them. Among them was a young operative named Severino Garcia Santa Romana. Santa Romana, a Filipino-American intelligence asset, had served with the OSS's Manila branch during the Liberation Campaign. Fluent in several dialects and with deep connections, among local guerrilla units, he became a valuable intermediary between US officers and Filipino resistance leaders who claimed to know the locations of Japanese tunnel systems. In the summer of 1946, one of these contacts led him to an area outside Bamban, Tarlac Province, a site of heavy Japanese engineering during the war. What he found there would change the course of post-war intelligence history. According to later declassified notes, Santa Romana and a small US Army engineering detachment uncovered a sealed tunnel entrance concealed beneath collapsed jungle terrain. The walls were marked with kanji inscriptions and the imperial chrysanthemum crest, unmistakable signs of an official Japanese installation. Inside, they discovered evidence of a deliberate burial, reinforced concrete, layered earth, and a network of booby traps. As the men cleared a passageway, they reached a secondary vault, partially flooded, lined with wooden crates marked with serial codes. When opened, they revealed gold bars wrapped in oilcloth and stamped with foreign mint marks: Switzerland, London, Hong Kong. The discovery was immediately classified. A US Army report dated August 17, 1946, labeled "Eyes Only, Economic Intelligence," described the site as a probable deposit of enemy-looted assets of great material value. The document also contained a cryptic note to be secured and inventoried under direction of S.G. Santa Romana. Further excavation suspended pending higher authorization. That authorization, historians now believe, came from none other than General Douglas MacArthur himself. MacArthur's intelligence division was uniquely positioned to handle such matters. The war had left Japan bankrupt, and the emerging geopolitical landscape of Asia was shifting rapidly. With the Cold War on the horizon, Washington saw strategic value in covertly recovering and controlling enemy assets. Gold, especially in large, untraceable quantities, could finance black operations without congressional oversight, whether by official order or secret understanding. Santa Romana's discovery was quietly absorbed into what later documents would refer to as Project Santa Romana. Through late 1946 and into 1947, the project expanded. Small, compartmentalized teams, often listed as engineering recovery units, began operating across Luzon, searching for similar sites. Local rumors spread of American officers hiring villagers to dig at night under armed guard. In one case, a Philippine guerrilla leader named Major Marcos Agustin reported to Manila police that he had been offered 50,000 pesos for guiding Americans to Japanese tunnels. His statement was dismissed, and Agustin later vanished without trace. Meanwhile, the OSS veterans overseeing the work ensured that their operations left minimal paper trails. Field reports were often coded as infrastructure clearance or ordnance recovery. Photographs of recovered caches were classified top secret. And by 1947, the newly formed Central Intelligence Agency had assumed direct control over the project's financial outcomes, channeling recovered gold into covert international accounts. A declassified memo from the early 1950s, found decades later in the US National Archives, references an asset recovery program, Pacific Theater, Phase 2. The author, believed to be a former intelligence officer under MacArthur, noted that funds derived from recovered Japanese bullion have been placed in trust for long-term strategic use. The memo does not specify where those funds went, but subsequent investigations would connect them to covert financing programs known by a code name, Black Eagle Trust. For Santa Romana, the discovery was both a triumph and a curse. He was sworn to absolute secrecy, and his reports were sealed under the highest classification levels. Yet his name would later appear in the private banking records of Swiss and Hong Kong institutions as the custodian of vast sums deposited under anonymous trust accounts. Whether these represented the true proceeds of Yamashita's treasure or were part of a larger intelligence network remains a matter of debate. By the late 1940s, as the world turned its attention to the growing confrontation between East and West, the Philippine jungles once again fell silent. The sealed tunnels remained untouched, at least officially. But local farmers continued to find strange relics: Japanese helmets, rusted crates, and concrete vaults bearing the imperial crest. Each discovery rekindled the legend, and for the men within U.S. intelligence, one question lingered. Had they truly found the fabled Golden Lily treasure, or only a fraction of something far larger still hidden beneath the earth? As the sun set on post-war Manila, a new conflict had begun. One fought, not with armies, but with secrecy, deception, and the shadow of a lost fortune that refused to stay buried. By the dawn of the 1950s, the world was no longer at war. But for intelligence operatives in the Pacific, the shadow of Yamashita's gold loomed larger than ever. The Cold War was escalating. The United States had established its post-war presence across Asia, and Japan, once the enemy, was now being rebuilt as a bulwark against communism. In the hushed corridors of American intelligence, recovered wartime assets, including the gold unearthed by Severino Santa Romana and others, began to serve a new purpose: funding covert operations that could not be traced to any government ledger. The existence of these hidden funds was never formally acknowledged. They were by design a state secret. Declassified fragments of correspondence between General Douglas MacArthur's intelligence chief, Major General Charles Willoughby, and select US Treasury officials suggest a quiet transfer of recovered bullion into strategic reserves. Officially, these reserves were never recorded in the Federal Gold Register. Unofficially, they were known to a handful of insiders as part of the Black Eagle Trust. This trust, if the accounts are to be believed, was not a single fund, but a network, an interlinked system of covert financial accounts established between 1946 and 1951. The goal was simple but extraordinary: to create an untraceable, financial base for US intelligence, operations during the emerging Cold War. The funds could be used to influence elections, finance anti-communist movements, or stabilize fragile post-war economies, all without the burden of congressional oversight or public accountability. Santa Romana, still operating under the auspices of the CIA's Far East Division, continued to oversee recovery efforts across the Philippines. Working with an American intelligence officer named Edward Lansdale, he became central to what some insiders later referred to as the Gold Connection. Together, they identified dozens of suspected sites from Yamashita's wartime maps. Many yielded nothing more than empty vaults and rusted crates, but a few produced unmistakable results: gold bars, foreign minted coins, and crates bearing the Imperial Japanese seal. The recovered material was discreetly transported to Manila's Nichols Air Base and flown to Tokyo under US military guard. One of Lansdale's associates, Colonel L. Fletcher Pruty, would later write in his unpublished notes that recovered enemy assets were laundered through international banking institutions to form a global operational fund. The key word, laundered, was never officially used, but banking records from Swiss accounts opened in 1950 under aliases connected to Santa Romana suggest vast deposits that did not originate from any legal post-war transaction. Each account was cloaked in diplomatic secrecy, and all were held under trusts that listed their ownership as USIA Pacific, a known cover for covert intelligence activity. While Washington debated reconstruction aid for Japan and the Philippines, secret gold-fueled operations were already shaping the balance of power in Asia. Some historians later claimed that portions of Yamashita's treasure were used to finance the rebuilding of Japan's Liberal Democratic Party, ensuring a pro-Western government through the 1950s. Others linked the funds to clandestine payments supporting Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists in Taiwan and anti-communist guerrilla movements in Korea and Indochina. None of these claims were ever officially confirmed, but the pattern was undeniable. As the network of secrecy expanded, so did its risks. By the mid-1950s, word of the treasure began to leak beyond intelligence circles. Filipino military officers who had assisted Santa Romana demanded their share of the recovered assets. One of them, Colonel Florentino Torres, publicly accused US operatives of stealing the gold that rightfully belonged to the Filipino people. Weeks later, Torres was found dead in what local authorities ruled an accident. His family never accepted the explanation. Meanwhile, President Elpidio Quirino of the Philippines quietly met with American officials to negotiate a share of the alleged recovery funds. A 1951 memorandum from the US Embassy in Manila records an agreement of mutual understanding regarding post-war assets of Japanese origin. The details remain redacted to this day, but shortly thereafter, Quirino deposited $14 million into a reconstruction account in a Swiss bank. It was labeled simply as reparations. In Tokyo, General MacArthur's headquarters oversaw Japan's economic revival. Behind the scenes, his intelligence officers and financial advisors worked to ensure that certain wartime assets were discreetly repurposed. According to one former staff officer, the gold became the grease that made the post-war machine run. Yet none of this appeared in the official occupation records. And by the time MacArthur returned to the United States in 1951, the trails had been deliberately obscured. For Severino Santa Romana, the operation was reaching its peak and its danger. Entrusted with overseeing hidden deposits scattered across the Philippines, he became both a key holder and a potential liability. Reports from the late 1950s suggest that Santa Romana was moved under deep cover and operated through financial proxies in Hong Kong, Zurich, and New York. He would later disappear from public view entirely, resurfacing only decades later through legal disputes over control of trust assets. The legend of Yamashita's gold was no longer confined to the jungles of Luzon. It had become entangled in the global machinery of Cold War finance and espionage, a hidden empire built on the spoils of another. Officially, no US agency ever admitted to recovering or utilizing Japan's wartime treasure. Yet the evidence, scattered through memos, banking records, and whispered recollections, told a different story. By the end of the decade, the trail of gold was buried beneath layers of secrecy deeper than any mountain vault. But as the Cold War deepened, those who knew of the operation began to ask a dangerous question. If the treasure had been used to build a shadow empire of money and power, Who really controlled it? The answers, like the tunnels of Luzon, were sealed, waiting for those willing to dig deep enough to find them. By the 1970s, the story of Yamashita's lost treasure had drifted from classified archives into the restless imaginations of adventurers, former soldiers, and treasure hunters. The Philippines, a nation layered in war's ruins and post-war secrecy, became a stage for obsession. In the humid jungles of Luzon, men with shovels, dynamite, and maps, copied from fading Japanese documents, sought to uncover what governments had long denied. Some were mercenaries, others were veterans of the Pacific War, haunted by rumors that they had once fought above mountains of buried gold. Among them was Rogelio Roger Roxas, a locksmith and amateur historian from Baguio City. In 1971, Roxas claimed that he and his team had discovered a sealed tunnel beneath the mountainside near Camp John Hay, a former US Army rest station during the war. Guided by a Japanese informant named Fuchigami, a supposed member of the Imperial Army's wartime engineering corps, Roxas and his crew dug for months through thick clay and rock. Their efforts, he later recounted, led them to a chamber reinforced with steel beams. Inside, they found skeletons, likely forced laborers, and a large gilded Buddha statue, nearly 1 meter tall and weighing over a ton. Within the statue, Roxas claimed, were bars of solid gold. News of the discovery spread rapidly, drawing attention from local officials, military officers, and, soon, the office of Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos. Marcos, himself a veteran of the war and an opportunist with a keen interest in wartime treasure, quietly took over the operation. In 1972, Roxas's home was raided by government agents. He was arrested, beaten, and interrogated. The Buddha and the gold were confiscated, never to be seen publicly again. When Roxas later sued the Marcos family in the 1980s, he testified under oath that the president had personally told him, "You did well, Roger, but this gold belongs to the government now." In 1996, a Hawaiian court ruled in favor of Roxas's estate, affirming that the treasure had been real, yet no physical evidence ever surfaced. The Roxas case reignited public interest in the legend of Yamashita's gold. Soon, international journalists, ex-intelligence officers, and self-proclaimed experts flooded the Philippines, each armed with new proof, maps allegedly drawn by imperial engineers, coded ledgers found in Tokyo, or declassified OSS reports. Many expeditions ended in tragedy. Some teams vanished entirely. In 1983, a joint Japanese-Filipino group excavating near Mount Tralala was killed when their tunnel collapsed after triggering a hidden explosive device, a wartime trap that had lain dormant for nearly 40 years. Survivors spoke of hearing a hollow echo moments before the blast, like air escaping from a chamber. Local villagers began to speak of a sumpa, a curse, guarding the treasure. Historians, however, saw a more pragmatic explanation: the lethal remnants of war. The Japanese had indeed mined and booby-trapped many of their bunkers during retreat operations in 1945. Any excavation without expert clearance was a gamble with death. Still, the notion of a curse persisted, not as superstition, but as a warning that greed for the past could destroy those who chased it. As the Marcos regime deepened its grip on power through the 1970s, reports of secret gold shipments surfaced in the financial press. Allegations emerged that Marcos had discovered multiple treasure sites and used the recovered wealth to finance his political machine and private accounts abroad. US intelligence agencies, meanwhile, stayed silent, though declassified diplomatic cables reveal that American officials were aware of the rumors. One 1978 State Department memo mentions credible accounts of post-war Japanese assets recovered in the Philippines and misappropriated by local authorities. Yet, as always, no proof was ever publicly acknowledged. For those who continued to dig, Americans, Filipinos, even Japanese veterans, the line between history and obsession blurred. In the dense mountain ranges near Nueva Vizcaya, search teams unearthed rusted trucks, Imperial Army swords, and sealed concrete walls. Geophysical scans showed voids deep within the rock, but explosives and equipment failures ended most attempts prematurely. Each abandoned dig added to the mythos that the gold was near, but unreachable. A former US Army engineer named Henry Boyd, who joined one of these expeditions, wrote in his memoir, Beneath the Bamboo Sky, "You could smell the war down there. The air was thick, metallic, We found bones, dog tags, even a rosary. But no gold. It was as if the mountain itself was holding its breath. His account captures the essence of what had become the Yamashita phenomenon, a haunting blend of history, greed, and unresolved war trauma. By the 1980s, with the fall of Marcos and the rise of a democratic Philippines, official investigations were launched into his alleged hidden wealth. Witnesses claim to have seen US intelligence officers assisting in the transport of heavy cargo from northern Luzon during the late 1970s. Some suggested that the Americans had reclaimed their share of what was once covertly recovered in the 1940s. Others dismissed the claims as political theatre. What remained certain was this: despite decades of searching, no verifiable cache of Yamashita's treasure had ever been publicly recovered. Every lead ended in silence, every photograph inconclusive. The mountains, once echoing with the sounds of war, now guarded their secrets in stillness. And yet, scattered among official archives, court testimonies, and whispered recollections, fragments of truth persisted. Men had died for something. Governments had moved quietly to hide something. Whether that something was gold, intelligence, or guilt, no one could say for sure. As the century neared its end, the legend of Yamashita's gold had grown from a wartime secret into a global enigma, one measured not just in wealth, but in the human cost of chasing shadows. Decades after the guns of World War II fell silent, the legend of Yamashita's gold endures, shimmering on the edge between history and myth. For historians, it remains one of the most persistent enigmas of the 20th century. For treasure hunters, it's a call that still echoes through the jungles of Luzon. 70 years on, the question remains: what really happened to Japan's lost treasure of war? Modern researchers tracing the story have found fragments scattered across time: declassified US military memos, Japanese engineering blueprints, post-war banking records, and survivor testimonies. In the archives of the US National Archives and Records Administration, a handful of cryptic field reports from 1946 to 1948 describe enemy asset recovery operations, many tagged with the initials SGSR, believed to refer to Severino Garcia Santa Romana. Yet beyond these faint traces, official records fall silent. The trail ends in redactions and missing files, as if the earth itself had swallowed the truth. In the Philippines, local memory keeps the story alive. Mountain villages around Baguio, Nueva Ecija, and the Sierra Madre Range still tell tales of men digging by moonlight, of tunnels that breathe warm air, and of metallic echoes beneath the soil. Farmers have unearthed fragments of Japanese equipment: helmets, bayonets, and sometimes sealed concrete walls, remnants of an empire's last stand. Government-sponsored surveys in the 1990s, led by the Philippine National Museum, investigated several of these Yamashita sites. They found evidence of wartime engineering, yes, but no treasure. Yet each empty tunnel seemed only to deepen the mystery. Journalists and historians continue to probe the intelligence side of the story. In the 1980s, US Senate investigators reviewing Cold War covert funding uncovered scattered references to Black Eagle Trust, accounts linked to untraceable gold reserves in Asia. Some named retired CIA and military personnel who had served in Japan or the Philippines in the late 1940s and men with prior connections to MacArthur's intelligence circle. But without verifiable documents, the evidence was circumstantial. When questioned publicly, officials denied the existence of any such fund. "There are myths," one former CIA officer told Time magazine in 1988. But myths sometimes grow from something real. In Japan, the topic remains taboo. Government officials have never acknowledged the existence of Operation Golden Lily, though captured documents from post-war trials describe looting on a massive scale. Japanese veterans associations maintain that most of the empire's wartime wealth was destroyed or confiscated by the Allies. Still, in private, some former soldiers have claimed otherwise, that the gold was buried not to save the empire, but to preserve its future. In 1992, a Japanese engineer named Akihiko Yamamoto, who said he had served under Yamashita's command, told a Manila newspaper, "We built vaults to last forever. The Americans found some, but not all." In the modern era, technology has reignited the hunt. Ground-penetrating radar, magnetometric surveys, and drone-based mapping have turned up anomalies deep beneath the Philippine highlands. In 2014, a private excavation team near San Fernando detected a metallic chamber more than 90 meters underground. The government halted the dig after it breached a wartime cemetery, citing cultural and safety concerns. Yet leaked photographs from the site show concrete walls bearing Japanese inscriptions and, faintly visible, the imperial chrysanthemum crest. Whether real or fabricated, the images spread across the internet, breathing new life into the mystery. To skeptics, Yamashita's gold is a perfect storm of myth-making, the chaos of war, the corruption of occupation, and the secrecy of intelligence agencies. To believers, it's unfinished history, a buried archive of empire and power hidden in plain sight. What cannot be denied is the impact of the legend itself. The search for the treasure has cost countless lives, fueled political scandals, and revealed how war's shadows can linger long after the treaties are signed. Standing today in the mist-covered mountains of northern Luzon, it's easy to understand why the story endures. The air is thick with memory, of soldiers and prisoners, of secret operations and lost maps. Somewhere beneath the soil, perhaps, lie the last sealed vaults of an empire that refused to surrender its wealth to defeat. Or perhaps the true treasure is not gold, but the mystery itself, the way it binds history, greed, and the unending human hunger to know what lies hidden. For historians and intelligence veterans alike, Yamashita's gold represents more than a lost fortune. It's a mirror reflecting the darker side of victory, the secret deals, the buried crimes, the unrecorded truths of a war that changed the world. And though the names of those who buried it, found it, and spent it have faded into history, the silence remains. Deep beneath the jungles, sealed in concrete and memory, the echoes of Operation Golden Lily still whisper through time, a reminder that some secrets of war were never meant to be uncovered. The cursed gold of Yamashita may never be found, but its story, forged in conquest, sealed in secrecy, and rediscovered in legend, continues to haunt the quiet places of history, where truth and myth remain forever intertwined.